Well, hello, and welcome to another episode of the Imperfect Men's Club. My name is Mark Aylward, and I'm here as always with my good friend, colleague, and co-host, Jim Gurley. And Jim brought an interesting topic to the table for the free game, as is typically the case. It's directly related to our flywheel, which I'll let Jim expand on as he does per usual. But today's topic is self-discovery. And, one of the interesting things, Jim, about that topic is not only is it in the center of our wheel, it's one of our words, but it really is this combination of self-reflection, self-awareness, and the notion that if I want to look inside and I want to look at myself from the outside to the extent that that's possible and kind of discover who am I really?
Mhm.
This kind of work is kind of what we do. It's kind of what part of what I've been doing my whole life is, when you're interviewing someone to try and find them a better job, you're doing self-discovery work with them. It's less maybe self-discovery, but it's collective discovery of both selves. And it's interesting that we came upon this topic. The other funny thing about it is we started talking about it because you ran into somebody that was talking to you about numerology and she ran your numbers. And that became our pregame discussion about, well, how many different ways are there to do this self-discovery? And there seemed to be quite a few. And then astrology came up and so on and so forth. So I'll pass it over to you and maybe you can tell us how you met this woman and what kind of happened to lead us to this topic.
Yeah, like always, the topics come from experiences in the prior week. But also, it always, as you mentioned, it comes back to our framework of these 5 areas of our life. And then over particularly the last year, really focusing on the center. And that center always starts with the self hyphen, but it always also starts with self awareness. So, the Imperfect Men's Club podcast, The Imperfection is the Perfection, is the framework that we've created. But it just seems as it always rings true because there's no perfection. I mean, it's the imperfection is the perfection. And even though I was aware of some of these, what do we call them? Systems, tools, techniques. I find that since we've been doing the podcast, and we have this framework. They have more meaning, and then again with this amazing new technology called AI, how we can stack them on top of one another is just a whole other dimension of self discovery and self awareness. So yeah, particularly in this case, because I think I mentioned I did my the other reading. What is it? Briggs Myers, is that what you refer to it as? The personality test.
That's one of them. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
one of them.
And that came back as I was EN TJ. So that gave me some indication of uh, my personality type, not really aware what that was, but turned out that was, quite accurate, especially if I look past 20, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, even to childhood. It was the same person that was doing these things. I just wasn't self aware that this was somewhat predetermined by these personality tests. But yeah, this particular this again, it was a NKBA event, so it's a networking event. We came in, we were talking, and um, I'd never met her before, but she through the conversation she had asked me some questions, and she had a kind of a, what do you call it? Was it special, but a maybe of a
Mys-
glow or something, or like
Mystical.
yeah,
Yeah.
so yeah, there you go, mystical, right? But it was a short conversation, and then she was not a member, she was interested in a member, so we ended up having lunch the following week, and just in a very nice way, casual way, asked me, "Hey, what are your?" And I go, "I'm not sure." Oh yeah, she asked me I think maybe my sign or birth date, and then didn't go too deep into it, but she ran my numbers. So when
Mm.
I said the numbers, and that's what we talked about in the pregame, and when it came back, it was really eye opening, especially with AI because you stack it on top of each other. So yeah, I think it will have some fun. But just to remind our listeners that aren't familiar with our framework, every week what we discuss is these 5 areas of our life, and we pick a topic based on one of these areas. So no particular order, but of course, as a man, it's our life's work, which is our profession. That's the
Mhm.
that's really who we are. It's our identity. The other one is our relationship with others, and that could be relationships with men, and we separate that to men and women, or mothers. And this is kind of interesting. It's funny, right? Because when I brought this up and asked you, I said, "Hey, Mark, do you follow this?" What was your answer? You said,
My girlfriend does and my daughters do. Yeah.
"Yeah."
Yeah. I literally, dude, I don't think I've ever had a conversation with another man about this
Yeah, yeah.
in
And my
my
sister
entire
follows
life.
this, and other people have mentioned it, but I've kind of blew it off. Like, yeah, yeah, kind of not, until my numbers came back, and that was a whole different conversation. The other areas in our life is our relationship with ourself, which is our mental health, our physical health. I think this is very related to our mental health, because
Hmm.
the more you know yourself, the more you accept yourself, and you realize that we are a certain way as a person, and you stop fighting that, and you just embrace that. So that's, I think, very related to our mental health. Our relationship with money, abundance versus scarcity. Sure, this plays out. I think if you're self-aware, and you're at your very best, you're gonna monetize that, just through your personality, or not your personality, just through your vibrations.
Hmm.
Mark, you and I are both in the business development, which is basically sales,
Hmm.
and that's persuasion. And the most effective people that have the ability to persuade an opinion or something of value without being do it naturally. So I think this is very related to being in alignment. And yeah, at the end of the day, it's all about alignment of who we
Well,
are,
I think
what
it's
we're
I
doing.
think it's interesting on so many levels, right? So it's like this is kind of like a random meeting of with a woman you'd never met before.
Well, let's come back to that. I just got to mention the last one, which
Yeah.
is worldview, because when we started, you said, I think this falls into worldview. So I'll just mention what a worldview is in our framework, and then I'll let you take it from there as far as
Okay.
where do you believe it falls into worldview. And remember, in worldview, all these categories have subcategories, but we have two. And the first category is our childhood, our heritage, and our spirituality, our religion. So whatever we were exposed to early on in life, in my case, in your case, Catholic, I was baptized, married in the Catholic Church. All those things are very much part of our belief system, right?
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
and then even our politics right now. Um, we talk about how divided we are between the red team and the blue team, and so yeah, I'll let you take it from there. But that's the framework, and in the center is ourself. And today we're going to talk about self-discovery.
Well, first of all, let me read self-discovery, what the definition of it is, and
Hmm.
that'll kind of frame it as well. Self-discovery is the process of gaining a deep understanding of your own character, motivations, and values. It often involves peeling back the layers of societal expectations, family pressure, or habitual behaviors to find what truly resonates with you at your core. Instead of looking outward for validation, self-discovery is an inward journey to identify your authentic why. There's a lot of cliches in this world and in this conversation, and I don't profess to be an expert at any of this stuff, although I have spent most of my life helping clients with the acting as an agent to help them with their own self-discovery before we go off looking for a better job or a better place in life. So it's really all encompassing. The other interesting thing, and you've alluded to it a couple of times, is it predetermined when we're born if some of this stuff is true, or all of it's true, or none of it's true? Or do we have the ability our entire life to continue this process and alter some of the pre-existing conditions, if you will, that we get from our culture or our parents or our
Hmm.
childhood or our faith? And then I wrap the whole thing up in faith because I'm a practicing Catholic.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
and to me, these are all just tools that God has made available to us to use as we choose.
Hmm.
The last thing I'll say before you take it back is, in my experience, most people never do this, right? And I
Hmm.
think Jim and I concluded, whether we wanted to hear it or not, that most of the people in the world that have brought any of this stuff to my attention have been women. And I think that
Hmm.
probably speaks to the idea that women have a sensitivity that's different than men's to this kind of thing.
Hmm.
Because I didn't say that. I wasn't a rehearsed comment I made to you. I literally said to you, my girlfriend and both my daughters are into this
Hmm.
stuff.
Yeah.
And then we started laughing about that. So that's probably a
Well, you tried
topic
to
for
turn it
another
into
time.
an episode about women. I said, no, 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 we're not going there.
But, I think that the two things we started with, your experience with numerology, which is basically your name
Hmm.
with the letters are assigned a specific number, like the
Hmm.
alphabet, right? One, two,
Yeah.
three, four, five, A,
Yeah.
B, C, D,
She
E.
ran my numbers. I said, this
Yeah.
is
Well,
what
that's
made this so
probably why we
compelling.
started talking about it,
Hmm.
because if you just talked about the topic and she didn't run your numbers, it probably wouldn't have been as interesting for you.
Hmm.
You know,
Hmm.
you might have even forgotten all about it, right?
Right. Yeah.
So the last part is like, man, you can overthink shit in this life, right? This like you
Mhm.
could spend your whole life playing with your numbers and adjusting stuff and overthinking things.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so this could be very helpful, but it also could be very confusing, you know. I also don't want to project what I'm going to do with this stuff because I don't know. I might look into it, I might not. But you've got a personality test results, you've got numerology
Hmm.
results,
Hmm.
and you've been talking to people about your astrological results as well.
Hmm.
You're a Pisces, whatever
Yeah.
that means. And
Right.
so, if you do combine those and stack them with AI and produce an output, maybe I'd like to hear about that.
Well, I kind of was just already started that process, and uh, it, I'm just blown away. And I think part of this, to put it in context, I've also had 60 years to figure this out. If I think doing this at 16 or 26 or 36 or 46 is going to be different than at this stage in our lives because um, you have more time to reflect on what's happened in the past. It's also part of, I guess, also bigger. As you know, I'm into systems. I like processes and systems. It's just part of who I am. And the term human design came up, and that's really what this is. We have these tools to create a human design framework that gives us a much better understanding of who we are. So we're not at this, particularly at this stage in our lives, or even in your, I'd say 30s, 40s, and 50s. You may evolve, you may change, but you are still who you are. I think that's from birth. So I'm not trying to get too deep into whether this is right or wrong, but when you can put a birth date, the year, the date, and even the time you were born, and then it gives you data back, that's a system. And if it's relatively, nothing's 100%. I use the 80/20 rule in just about everything I do. And if it's 80% usable or factual, then it's worth applying into my everyday life. And that goes back to self-awareness.
Yeah, yeah. I think that the whole issue of human design, it makes me think of the phrase, man makes plans and God laughs, right? So this is all potentially laughable. And I think some people, you could go about self-discovery in a lot of different ways. We've named just a few of them. And it is a core component of my work. Like right now, helping men overcome the whole notion of divorce. That whole process begins with self-discovery. You have to do that to have any effective measure at all of moving someone forward from a place of sadness or anger or anxiety, whatever. And I think that you've been an entrepreneur and a consultant to other people and companies your whole life, so
Mhm.
you've done all kinds of this work too. We just
Mhm.
maybe called it something else, you know?
Yeah, yeah, it's a good point. I think the other thing that became apparent was your environment, the people you're interacting with, right? In this particular case, uh, the way that she presented it to me was very credible, and she, again, it wasn't like she was trying to sell it. It was just very matter of fact.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So the messenger has a lot to do with that. I
It
think,
does, and your circumstances as well. I mean,
no
your
question.
your
Yeah.
your willingness and interest to hear about it, right?
Yeah.
Which I think goes back to what you
Yes.
said earlier
Interesting to
about
be
our
seen.
age.
Yeah.
Our
Yeah.
age is
It's
like, I
good
mean,
point, Mark. Yeah.
I think if you're at all predisposed to self-discovery or self-awareness in
Hmm.
your life, I think that ratchets up as you get older
Yeah.
because it's just the way we think about how much time we have left on the earth and what we're going to do and accomplish with that time. I think that, as things change, like divorce or the kids grow up and leave the home, or,
Hmm. Hmm.
somebody gets sick or dies, all these things are circumstances that would make one more or less open to hearing about these things.
Hmm.
But I think my inclination to these things is they're interesting to me and
Hmm.
I'm aware of them, but I don't choose to invest a lot of time in them. I personally would rather pray and
Hmm.
exercise
Yeah.
and communicate in social relationships with people that will make me better and prop me up and help me out. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
those are, I think
Yeah.
you don't have to do one or another, and you can do them all if you want. But
Yeah.
the other thing
And
about age is, and I'll throw it back to you, is that
mhm,
when we start running out of time, we tend to make different choices about how we want to spend that
mhm, mhm.
time.
Yeah, and just even what we call it. You mentioned pray, which of course I respect that, but meditation is a form of prayer.
It is.
So even just the labeling or recategorizing the terminology also changes the way you consume this newfound information or knowledge.
Delivery's big. Delivery's
Yeah, yeah.
big.
It's
Yeah, yeah,
something
yeah.
you mentioned. I forgot to mention. It is the law of attraction, right? Because now you would ask me how did we met at this event, but I think I mentioned something about the Imperfect Men's Club, and she had listened to an episode, and
Oh,
yeah, you see, I'm glad you brought that up. I forgot about that. That's why there was some alignment here already,
hmm.
and
Yeah, that is
right,
interesting. But I
isn't
also
it?
think, I mean, to beat up the same age point, if you were in your 20s, you were probably might have just as easily said, "Listen, whack job, I gotta get moving." So
I'm sure I
uh,
did, and sure
talk to
you did,
somebody
man.
else about that, okay?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But as you're referring to, you have to be in the it's a law of attraction. I had to be in the right place. So it's alignment and connectivity at the right person. I'm glad you brought that up. You have to be in a place where you're open or receptive to learning about these things or rediscover them.
And there is, I mean, that energy piece is, I totally believe in that. I think we're all connected in some capacity. I attribute
Mhm.
that to God. You can attribute it to whatever you want, but the
Sure.
movement of the moon, the movement of the stars, the
Hmm.
the ebbing and flowing of the tides,
Yeah,
those are all energetic resources that have impacts on us. I mean, isn't it
absolutely.
true? Isn't
Yeah.
it true that when there's full moons, people get a little wacky? You
Hmm.
know, I've heard that many times in my life. But
Yeah, I,
and
I
then
remember when I was growing up, my mother was a labor and delivery RN nurse, and she worked the night shift. So she would leave the house like at 11 o'clock at night, come back at 7 in the morning to get us up, to send us off to school. There was four of us. But I remember her saying on a full moon, there was more babies or something. And that was just in conversation. I was like 5 or 10 years old. I don't remember, but yeah. And did she say that just because that was a coincidence? No. After
no.
35 years of delivering babies in the labor and delivery, the night shift, she would get more babies when there was a full moon.
Yeah, I mean, look,
You can't deny the data on that one, right?
well, the interest, one of the things you'd mentioned in the pregame was the stacking issue, and maybe you can talk to that a little bit. But I think that what I heard was you take the numerology results, you take the astrological results, you consider it all in the context of human design. Maybe you take the personality test results, and
Hmm.
then you put it into Claude or Chat or whatever you use in Google, Gemini, and you go,
Yeah.
okay, bring me back what all this means together.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
and that and have you done that?
Yeah, this is why we're talking about it today. I was like
Okay.
I said,
Okay.
but I didn't have my numbers. That once the numbers came in, I couldn't resist what to do with it.
I gotcha. I
She ran
gotcha.
my numbers. She asked me what my birth date was and this information. And I was like, wow, this is yeah, it's pretty cool. Let me check it out. And then I ran it, but I ran it against my personality type, which is an EN um, J TJ. And then they're very good. It's kind of says the same thing, actually. I
Yeah.
was surprised how much alignment there was just on those two, where they had nothing to do with one another, or maybe they do.
You
I
know
think it's
what's
bullshit.
what would be interesting as well, and I actually teach this, I recommend this, I should
Mhm.
say, to everyone, client or not, is
Mhm.
it's particularly when you're trying to put like marketing collateral together or messaging,
Hmm.
telling the world
Oh yeah, personal
who you
brand
are
stuff.
and what you
Absolutely.
do, is I tell people pick up, send to five of people that know you very well and
Hmm.
ask them what your superpower is. Ask them what your biggest strengths are, and be brief with it. But I
Hmm.
remember doing that a couple of years ago for the first time,
Yes.
and I got back. It was two things. So many people were so kind and generous,
Hmm.
and I was fairly in line or aligned also with what the outside world thought of me or the impression
Hmm.
I left on the outside world. So
Yeah,
maybe that's another.
it's a self-confidence booster in a big
It
way.
was validation for sure, and it was
Yeah.
self-confidence and self-worth,
Hmm.
escalated a little bit, and then I slapped myself back with a little humility and said, use this wisely. But
Hmm.
yeah, I think that if you're self-aware and your tendency as a guy is to not do this kind of work, I think it's helpful,
Yeah.
but I do caution, because this is my vice, is overthinking stuff,
Yeah.
just like, oh my
Yeah. What you
gosh.
referred to was in the book by Dan Sullivan, Your Unique Abilities,
Hmm.
probably 10 or 15 years ago at least. But that's
Hmm.
exactly what one of the exercises were, where you do that. And that's part of his, Dan Sullivan
Yeah.
is a huge coaching business. And I read the book and yeah, and I actually knew two or three guys that went through the system, and that was one of their assignments was to go and ask about that. But remember, this is before AI. This is before these technologies that we have available to stack this, kind of like a technology stack. But Mark, before we wrap up, let's go through these other areas about the self-discovery. Um, these other two areas that we mentioned.
Yeah,
So,
the source material that you brought to this episode consisted of a couple of components, I should say, of
mhm,
self-discovery examples. So the first one is my sweet spot, the career pivot. It's
mhm,
someone spent a couple of decades in a typical corporate role
mhm,
because they thought financial security was their primary driver, and through
mhm.
self-discovery, they
Well,
sparked a
but yeah, if
period
you could
of.
just read that one, and then we'll break that down. That's
Yeah,
number one, right? Yeah.
yeah, that's the career pivot. And
Okay.
I've gone through thousands of these with thousands of different people. So it's
Mhm,
definitely self-discovery is at the core of it.
mhm,
And then, question about what's driving it. The next one they list is the relationship shift.
mhm.
And,
But yeah, but if you could just read the text below that, just
the career pivot.
the self-discovery of career pivot. Yeah, yeah.
Well, I kind of did. Imagine
Oh, okay.
someone who has spent 2 decades in a high pressure corporate role because they believed financial security was their primary driver. Through self-discovery, perhaps sparked a period of burnout or reflection.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I do think that is a great way to overcome burnout is self-reflection. How'd that happen? So, it
Yeah,
could be
why is it happening? How did it
right.
happen? Why is it
Yeah,
happening? I think so many people, Jim, in their careers trajectory, they end up in their 40s and 50s saying, "What am I doing?
right. Yeah.
What am I doing?"
Yeah.
Or
And it's about
doing.
self-reflection. You have to take some time to self-reflect and then look for data to justify or understand what happened and maybe either prevent that from happening again or make it happen again, especially if it was
Or,
something good.
it's part of what I do, and it's part of this process too, is just giving
Yeah.
people permission to think outside of whatever box they're in and dream a little bit bigger. You have that permission, but most people don't take themselves up on it.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's do number two. I
That's
thought that's
the
essential.
that's the relationship shift.
Uh-huh.
And this, I think, speaks to this issue of we are the five people we spend the most time with. And
Mhm.
person might realize they have spent years adopting the hobbies, communication styles, and even the opinions of their social circle or partner. Self-discovery occurs when they spend time in solitude or try new environments.
Mm.
Yeah, I think
Wow.
that
Yeah, that
we've
one.
talked about solitude a lot. That's powerful, you know.
Yeah, this one really. I didn't realize that because when I cut and pasted it, I didn't uh, realize exactly what it was saying. But there's no question that being alone and solitude is the most effective way, the only way, in my opinion, to have true self discovery and to self reflect,
Well,
because you have
yeah.
to turn down the noise around you, and in order to do that, um, you have to remove yourself to the environment that you're in. So often we become part of the environment, and it's also when you lose yourself as a man, either by habit or by expectations of others. You're pretty soon you wake up one day and go, what happened to me?
Yeah.
Because by nature, I think men are do want to serve. We do want to help others, um, and then
Well, I
pretty
think
soon.
that again, not to keep going back to my current work, but I think, when you get divorced as a man, your identity changes overnight, and the first reaction for most guys is like, who the fuck am I now? You
Hmm.
know,
Hmm.
I don't even know where I am anymore,
Hmm.
and that's a process. That's what I try to get to the bottom of. So, and new environments is interesting to me because my girlfriend, who I've now been with for over 7 years, she likes doing new stuff.
Hmm.
And I wasn't a big fan of new stuff, I discovered. And I tag along now, and she has a 20-minute rule. If one of us doesn't like it in 20 minutes, we get to leave. And
Hmm.
that takes the pressure off. But new environments are just they're stimulating. They're
Hmm.
different.
Hmm.
They they bring up different ideas and different ways of looking
Hmm.
at things and seeing things.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. It's often why people, and particularly women, like to travel because it does. It changes it interrupts the repetitive thought, and it opens your your mind to different things in different ways. And if you don't remove yourself from the environment, then yeah, pretty much you just keep doing the same thing. You're like it's like a machine. It's like a rerun on a movie. It just keeps repeating itself over and over again,
yeah,
whether you're
yeah.
self-aware or not.
Well, I know we're a little pressed for time, but I think I'll just share the exploration techniques that are available. They have you found three of them, and I think one of them is just what I do all the time is just keep asking the question why.
Hmm.
Why? This one says five in a
Yep.
row. The inversion technique, the second one of these techniques is, what do I want?
Yeah.
Ask yourself, what do I want to avoid?
Hmm.
Sometimes knowing what you don't want is clearer than finding what you do.
No question.
And then the last one is just a kind of like is part of what we've been talking about is a shift in your perspective, is looking at your life through different lenses.
Hmm.
And I write that down in my journal every day. Is what can I think about differently today?
Hmm.
Now I don't always act on that, but I always write it down. So it's always apparent to me that that's worthy of consideration, you know?
Yeah, yeah. I've said this before. I stopped giving advice. Um, and the reason I stopped giving advice is because my life lived experiences may or may not apply to somebody else's, right? They were a different time in a different place. What I will give is perspective, and it's interesting over the years, particularly with people that I know and value what I'm going to tell them or give them perspective. Is it's in life, it's not always what you do, it's what you don't do,
Hmm.
and to find out what you want is a difficult process. But sometimes just be clear on what you don't want, and by being super clear and maybe obsessed by what you don't want in your life, you can get closer to what you do want. And then it is manifestation. It is law of attraction. It is all this, all these things that
And
you have a certain
and
energy about
showing
you.
up,
Well,
showing up.
at the end of the
Yeah.
day, 90% of life is showing up. You got to
Well,
show up.
what I'll conclude with this is and it just struck me that all of this stuff we just talked about is the work that we're challenged to
Yeah.
do
Yep.
when we start to offer our services individually to anybody in the audience or any referrals from the audiences. It all starts with self-discovery, which
Yep.
begins with self-awareness, and then
Yep.
that's the strategy, and then we go into the tactics that we just talked about, the techniques and the exploration techniques and different ways of looking at things. We're getting closer and closer to the core work.
Absolutely. So, all right, Mark, until next week.
Thanks, Jim.